Right. Afternoon once again. Welcome to cybersecurity. And naturally, today we're going to be looking at cyber targets. So we've been discussing the whole concept of what obviously security is all about, what are the distinctive threats, and ultimately what is happening as far as the whole ICT space there is concerned. But I think it's also imperative for us to discuss the targets. What are these targets associated with cyber attacks? And obviously, how can they ensure that their security platforms are incorporated accordingly? How can they also ensure that they're not distinctively prone to these particular attacks that occur as far as the ICT space there is concerned? So our main focus as far as today's chapter is concerned is just going to be looking at the whole concept of what is these particular cyber attacks, what they are, and ultimately just literally examine the various potential targets as far as these particular cyber attacks are concerned, and literally understand exactly why they're distinctively targeted. And again, like I was just mentioning a couple of moments ago, just look at what type of measures that they can put in place in order for them to ensure that they ultimately secure as far as environments would go. And like we mentioned before, naturally, as far as this goes, it's there's no environment that is 100% secure, right? But you can make it a bit more difficult for these particular criminals, as far as cyber configurations they are concerned, make it a bit more difficult for them to try and attack your particular system. So being able to identify the different steps of these particular attacks, and obviously being able to try and put measures in place, both from a physical point of view, and obviously as far as your systems are concerned, to try and look at defending against these particular attacks as far as your generic environments they are concerned. So let's see if we can create our notes as usual as we go along. So what you want to take into consideration for first and foremost is just looking at the different targets that are there. So let's look at listing these cyber targets. So typical examples of the cyber targets that you'll find would include your individuals, naturally. So individuals. You'll also want to look at businesses, naturally. You also want to take into consideration CNI, which is normally associated with the term critical national infrastructure, as far as configurations there would go. And then you'll also want to discuss your buildings. Academia and research. Research. And then you also want to talk about the manufacturing industry. Manufacturing, let's see if you can write that accordingly. So there you go. So these are the basic targets that you'll find as far as your cyber security platforms are concerned. So you've got the basic individuals, you've got your businesses, naturally your critical national infrastructure, as well as your buildings, academia and research, manufacturing and industry, or the manufacturing industry at large, whichever way you look at it. So naturally, you find that there's literally a little, if anything, that we can do about criminals, a larger game plan. But obviously, we can take ownership of the individual part of the problem by literally securing our computers, our smartphones, our tablets, and networks in general. Right. So like I was just mentioning at the beginning there, that no environment is literally 100% secure, 100% safe. But naturally, when it comes to the individuals, just for argument's sake, or when it comes to us as individuals, if you want to look at it from a different point of view, is we can play our part by trying to securing our environments as far as our ICT existence or our digital existence there is concerned. So this would include your generic smartphones, your obviously your tablets, your laptops or your computer systems at large, and naturally the networks that we are distinctively participating in, or that we are distinctively part of. So obviously we need to be careful with whom we give information to, and naturally avoiding scams that are out there. I think it's sometimes it might seem as obvious content, really, in terms of you obviously not being avoiding scams and not giving your information willy-nilly to everyone out there. But ultimately, sometimes some of these practices or some of the things that we do it inadvertently. So ultimately, you might find that you're on a specific website, you need to incorporate content, and you don't think twice about entering, for instance, an email or a telephone number or a cell phone number, rather, that it is associated with you as an individual when you're looking at either conducting a survey for some odd reason, or literally trying to register for a specific a product or service as far as these particular apps they are concerned. Some of these things are just inadvertent ways in which we give out information. And then by the end of the day, before we even know it, that our particular online existence is distinctly jeopardized in that regard. And I think if you have been following the news, there's been a Trojan also that was released a couple of days and weeks ago, that would typically affected Android phones, right? And I think almost every country on across the globe was affected, and I think save I think China, if I'm not mistaken, but almost every country has been affected by that, and typically if I'm not mistaken, every country in Africa actually has been affected by that particular Trojan, as far as your Android phones they are concerned. And if you remember, when we were discussing computer architecture, we mentioned that Trojan horses literally work with and mimic legitimate software, and only begin to start manifesting on computer systems or gadgets or systems at large when a specific thing has happened or a specific a condition has been met, for argument's sake. So it's quite imperative for us to understand that, obviously, especially when we're online, we make sure that we're very vigilant in terms of the links that we choose to select, content we choose to access, sites we choose to visit, apps we choose to use, to avoid any discrepancies that might take place as far as your configurations would go. And one of the other things that we tend to forget, I think we mentioned this in our security session when we were discussing computer architecture, is that you can have the most intricate architecture put in place, right, or mechanisms put in place on your system. You can incorporate biometrics. You can have the most complex password that you literally can imagine. You can look at system security at large. But we tend to forget that the physical security is also of utmost importance, if not the first thing that we need to take into consideration. Because if our gadgets are stolen, then unfortunately our particular existence on the digital space becomes jeopardized. And the sooner you realize that your particular gadget has been stolen, the better it is for you in certain instances in terms of trying to block, for instance, your banking profiles, your banking platforms, and everything else, and possibly alert everyone in your particular circles, both from a personal as well as professional scale, that your particular gadgets have been compromised. So ultimately, they should literally look out for any content that might come out from your particular gadget or phone, or you name it, as far as configurations are concerned. So physical security is very important, right? Just make sure that our gadgets are not just lying around when in certain environments or vicinities where they can be typically stolen, for instance, as far as configurations are concerned there. And I think if you look at our basic habits, when we go out for lunch, for instance, or for dinner, as far as these particular restaurants are concerned, there's a tendency of us just placing our particular gadgets, especially our smartphones, on the table, having a discussion, enjoying our meals and so on, and literally being very absent when it comes to protection of that phone, because anyone can come in and grab that particular phone, and then there's some kind of jeopardy in that instance. And there have been a couple of clips that have been going around in terms of people stealing these particular cell phones in restaurants and so on. So it's very important to understand that, yes, while you might know what not to do on the online or digital space, in terms of giving out your information when you're not supposed to, or in terms of accessing sites or using certain apps that could jeopardize your security, it's also very important to make sure that you physically secure your particular gadgets as well, just to avoid any discrepancies that can take place in that regard. And then when you look at it from a business point of view, naturally, I think the businesses are, it's a given really that a lot of businesses out there, regardless of what business you're in, is distinct, are more or less associated with the whole concept of them being distinctive targets as far as the cyberspace is concerned. I think we might have mentioned this in one of the other previous lectures, that sometime about 3 or so months back, you had a meat factory that was that experienced a cyber attack. And then you start thinking, okay, what would a specific individual or group of individuals really want with a meat factory, just for argument's sake, as far as configurations would go? We also had a scenario, again, a month or so back, where Transnet reported their particular systems being jeopardized as well. So it's literally the order of the day when it comes to security and in terms of setups that are there. So literally, when you look at your businesses, right, obviously as a major target of these particular attackers, there's a whole issue of rewards in terms of, remember, information is quite vital within the business space. So you look at a certain group of individuals or an individual hacking into a system, or literally breaking into a system to gain certain information that they obviously sell on the open market. So this, if you're looking at the manufacturing setup, this could be prototypes of a design for a specific gadget, for a specific automobile. The list will go on and on. And obviously on the open market, there's so many bidders for that particular type of information, because there's so much rivalry when it comes to your business environments when you look at it from a larger perspective. So when you look at the rewards that I'm talking about, as far as configuration there is concerned, they are two different situations if you look at it from a different point of view, where the actual target is not the business itself, but something the business has. Like I was just talking about a couple of seconds ago, which could obviously be a database of customers with credit card details, or something that the business has developed, which is obviously a new product or a service, something that the business is planning. In that particular instance, like I was mentioning earlier on, rival organizations naturally would look at needing that information in certain instances to try and obviously have a massive advantage over their particular rivals, or to literally cripple their rivals so that they only become the main providers of a distinctive service or product as far as the environments they are concerned. And then ultimately you've got where the target is the actual business itself, then the intention of the attacker, you can obviously cause immediate financial or reputational damage associated with particular setups in that regard. So it's very important because in some instances, by the time we realize that we've been attacked, or by the time we even go public with it, more often than not, the damage has literally already been done. I think we had an issue with Sony a couple of years ago with their particular platform being hacked. A lot of customers' information, especially usernames, passwords, your credit card details, and so on, were distinctively jeopardized. But yeah, that particular issue was later resolved after some time. But again, there's always that reputational damage associated with Sony in terms of them not obviously being able to properly secure their customers or clients' details or information as far as configurations they are concerned. So it's also important to understand why, from a business point of view, it's literally the main thing to focus on if you're within the digital space, and actually to try and make sure that your environments are more secure as far as configurations are concerned. So try and avoid very simple things like having USB ports open, for argument's sake. So you walk into a computer room, you plug in your thumb drives, you access whatever content you've got on your thumb drive rather. That simple thing can literally cause massive issues within a business environment. Why? Because remember, these particular portable devices can be used to then have malware manifest on the actual systems. And again, like I said before you know it, issues have already been arisen in that particular instance. And one of the other things that is relevant in this particular setup is that last time we talked about some of the issues why it's very difficult to safeguard against these attacks. The speed of attacks is also one of the main important aspects to consider. So if you're looking at a scenario just like the example that I gave you with your USB ports being open for use and so on, you can have multiple individuals come in, sit at different stations as far as your system is concerned, plug in, have their particular malware manifest, and before you try and actually have measures put in place to try and circumvent that particular attack, literally the damage is already done, or it's already too late as far as your particular setups is concerned. So it's important to take cognizance of that distinctive fact. So other examples in terms of situations would include situations which a business might be attacked as if the actual attacker perceived that the organization has committed some kind of offense or injustice that needs to be publicly exposed. So you normally will find that in certain instances, you get some kind of vigilante behavior, if you want to look at it from a different point of view, where possibly a particular business has got disgruntled clients or individuals that they've typically hoodwinked, or individuals that they've not treated accordingly, if you want to look at it from a different point of view. So you have a typical example of environmental groups where you might find certain organizations or companies are literally dumping waste in environments when where they're not supposed to. That is arguably then affecting the environment. That is arguably then affecting specific localities that they're particularly engaging in. You'll find that certain individuals might want to expose that particular type of behavior. So the only way to do that is to literally attack the business from a cyber environment, or have a cyber attack associated with that particular exposure. And these are quite difficult because there's some kind of moral aspect associated with that as well. So is it something that is appropriate in that particular instance? Is it something that you personally would say, oh, okay, if that's the issue, then yes, they deserve to be attacked? Or are you then saying an attack at the end of the day, regardless of what it's supposed to be, literally providing for an exposure of a wrongdoing, or an exposure of criminals, you name it, it's still illegal as far as particular setups are concerned. So this is one of the important questions: that do these type of attacks that I was just talking about a couple of seconds ago, do they actually qualify for a cyber attack? Right. So it's important. This is where moral aspects come into play. And I think we discussed something about this as well in computer architecture in terms of integrity and honesty, where we were talking about honesty being the whole issue of telling the truth, and then integrity looking at doing the right thing. So it becomes there's a bit of a thin line in certain instances in that regard. And it's also important for us to understand exactly at which part of the fence are we sitting in, and which part of the fence literally is relevant, dependent on each individual issue that is provided for in that regard. So this is something that you also might need to take some time to think about as far as particular setups are concerned. So whether the business is actually large or small, it's still very important to make sure that the individuals within that business, the business itself, can literally be exposed to a cyber attack. So there's mechanisms that need to be put in place to try and avoid discrepancies at large in that particular instance. And I think what is also relevant in that in this regard is looking at the whole concept of the different steps of attacks that take place, right? So if you understand the steps of an attack, it's also it makes it a lot easier for you to also try and circumvent that attack or safeguard your systems as far as these particular attacks there are concerned. So just for argument's sake, if you look at from a generic point of view here, the actual steps of an attack, what you're distinctively looking at as a generic setup is probing for information. Obviously, there has to be some kind of investigative stage when it comes to the individuals that are trying to hack into your system, or the individuals that are trying to break into a distinctive system or environment. So there's the need for them to actually literally probe for information. And again, this is literally the first step, is to look at what is happening with the actual system at large, what is incorporated there. This is a type of reconnaissance, right, when it comes to providing information. So obviously information such as what type of hardware is being used, what type of version of software is being used or firmware that is being used, even personal information about the users that can then be used in the actual next step as far as configuration setup there is concerned. So this is part and parcel of the reconnaissance as far as configuration there is concerned. So reconnaissance. And then the second part that you want to distinctively concentrate on as far as the steps of an attack there is concerned is that of now penetrating any defenses. So you literally doing away with any, or literally making sure or disabling any particular defenses that are put in place to make it easier for you to manifest yourself as far as the actual system there is concerned. So the second one you want to look at is penetrate defenses. And what you're looking at as far as this particular setup is concerned is that once the actual system has been identified, right, and the information about it has been gathered in the first stage, you're now looking at the next step, which is to now launch the attack, which is an attack to actually penetrate the defenses. These attacks literally can come in any variety or in any particular form, such as literally manipulating or distinctively breaking a password as far as your particular environments would go. And once that is done, the third stage is now looking at modifying any security settings. So modification of any security settings. So modify any security settings there. Or just say modify security settings at large. So I think we can just mention this as modification of security settings. And in this particular instance now, what you're looking at is this literally allows the attacker to re-enter the compromised system more easily, right? Because when they modify security settings, it might not seem to the administrators or the organization at large that the system has been compromised. So what they do this is more or less, think of it as creating a particular type of backdoor in certain instances where you're modifying security settings that are there to make it a lot easier for you to break into the actual system itself. So for argument's sake, if you were to break into someone's apartment, just for argument's sake there, you are literally playing around with the actual lock and key to make it seem as if, yes, fair and fine, when I lock my door, I'm literally secure, but you've put in something in place there to make it easier for you to enter that particular apartment or enter that particular location by reconfiguring or by entering your own key there to gain distinctive access as far as that particular environment there is concerned. And then once that is done, so remember the first thing is to get to one system. And in a networked environment, that is a massive advantage to the attacker. Why? Because they can now spread to the other systems that are connected. So the main thing is to try and get in, as long as you can safely or properly or entirely connect or enter or distinctively jeopardize one system in the network environment, then spreading across multiple systems becomes a lot easier because you're already within that environment at large. So the fourth thing that you're looking at as far as basic attacks there is concerned is then circulate to other systems. So circulate to other systems. Right? And obviously, what you're looking at now is that the same tools that are literally used to probe for information are then directed towards other systems. So basic tools that are used to literally probe for information, like we had looked at in the first stage or step there, are literally used to then be directed to other systems as far as your particular network environments they are concerned. And obviously, once that is done, the next thing that an attacker would want to do is then parallelize networks and design and devices rather. So parallelize networks and distinctive devices. That literally makes it a lot easier now for them to fully jeopardize the system. So obviously, if the actual attacker chooses, they may also work to maliciously damage that particular network, that particular computer system. Right. So in certain instances, there is that whole issue of them probably getting information or getting something that is literally stored within that network, or literally ensuring that they get the information we're talking about earlier on, like your customer databases and so on. But more often than not, you find that some of these attackers will have malicious intent. And what that means is they just want to disrupt everything in terms of functionality, and they want to literally cripple that particular business institution or that individual at large, if you want to look at it from a different point of view. So ultimately, that would then look at damaging the actual computer system and the network at large as far as your particular setups would go. And what this would then mean is that this can include deleting or modifying files, right? Obviously, if there's no appropriate backup there, that can be a very detrimental scenario. And then you've got stealing of valuable data, like we were saying earlier on, making sure that the machine crashes or performing what we're now familiar with which are the denial of service attacks as far as your particular setup there is concerned. So these are the generic steps associated with how an actual attack distinctively takes place as far as your particular setups there is concerned. So it's also imperative to just understand specifically what particular measures you can also put in place to try and safeguard against that. So one of the other sections, like we mentioned before, in terms of the targets, would be your critical national infrastructure. All right. And in that particular instance, that critical national infrastructure would include communications, basic emergency services, your energy sectors, your financial services, food distribution networks, for argument's sake, the actual government at large, looking at basic health facilities, transportation systems. Again, goes back to what we were mentioning a couple of moments back when we discussed that Transnet was also a target when it came to these cyber attacks recently. And then you're also looking at water and sanitation, which is something as well that is quite delicate when it comes to your national infrastructure. If that particular environment is jeopardized, then possibility of individuals getting contaminated water in their homes is quite detrimental. Also makes it quite detrimental again when it comes to your sanitation environments not working accordingly. Remember, all of these systems are literally automated in certain instances, or there's some semblance of ICT incorporated in configuration. So literally, you can get malwares that are sent that would obviously jeopardize the way in which a specific distribution system functions, that could literally stop the way in which a distribution system functions, or literally redirect certain aspects of that distribution systems to specific environments, localities, you name it. So it's very important to ensure that hence the term critical in that CNI configuration, because it's one of the most important. If it's critical, it means that it's very important, right? Or it's an imperative platform. So if you've got these particular mechanisms in place that can at least identify these particular attacks as they happen or when they happen, makes it a lot easier to safeguard that particular infrastructure at large, because it takes a very small thing to literally derail everything when it comes to that critical national infrastructure, as far as particular setups there are concerned. I think although what we experienced in the past a month or so was more on a physical setup, but the same kind of disruption when it comes to distribution, when it comes to the whole concept of the business continuity and functionality at large can be provided for, can be done within the ICT environment. So it's very important to take that into consideration. Obviously, defense is one of them as well, quite a very important aspect. If it's jeopardizing, massive issues can take place there. You've got your nuclear stations, and then the chemicals as well, which is something that's quite dangerous if it's undertaken in the inappropriate fashion in that regard. So when you look at communications, there, your default go-to is the basic airwave network or your microwave network configurations, as far as basic government as well as non-government organizations are concerned. And you can also even discuss your satellite communications in this regard as part and parcel of the critical infrastructure network, or the network infrastructure that you've got as far as or national infrastructure that you've got as far as your particular setup there would go, because you're looking at providing some kind of reliable coverage in certain instances. And then one of the most common ones, obviously, when it comes to communication is the internet, right? I think every one of us understand the actual reason why the internet is quite an important infrastructure when it comes to communication at large, as far as your particular setup there is concerned. So obviously, provided for nationally and occasionally locally by internet service providers, this internet setup, it is a central platform that obviously allows for a lot of peer-to-peer connections, as well as an interconnectivity between the ISPs, obviously at a national level, to the ISPs in different countries or in different localities in that regard. So it's very important for communication platforms to be identified and as well secured appropriately when it comes to your critical national infrastructure in that regard. And obviously, emergency, so that is also self-explanatory, not just the police, but also looking at your rescue and ambulance services as typical examples of environments in this setup that is there. So you could find that certain communication platforms like your websites, your Twitter accounts and so on can be jeopardized or can be prone to your distributed denial of service attacks that obviously jeopardize the way in which information can be distributed accordingly as far as these particular emergency services they are concerned. So you might find that alternatively, you have certain individuals that might, again, hold a grudge against one of the services and feel that a cyber attack is a perfect way or is a justified response in terms of them more or less having their day in that regard. So it's very important to understand that these attacks are not just, again, from disgruntled individuals, either former employees or individuals that for a specific cause, you name it. But it literally anyone out there can be a suspect. I think this is one of the things that you need to take into consideration when it comes to the whole concept of cybersecurity at large. A lot of individuals think that, okay, no, this particular individual that is trying to attack the system and so on has got some kind of vendetta, but someone might want to do it just for the fun of it as well. This is also something that you need to take into consideration as well. I think we've mentioned this before, that someone can just try and break into a system just for the fun of it or because they can. So that's important in that particular aspect when it comes to ensuring there's some kind of understanding in terms of who is responsible or who might be responsible in terms of attacking specific environments. And obviously energy is a given. You've got electricity, gas, and oil in that particular setup. Again, about a week or so back, if you've been following the news as well, the Medupi station, ESCOM station, I think the fourth, one of the stations that are associated with obviously providing power accordingly, exploded, right? And there's still investigations that are running and so on in terms of what actually took place and so on. And some are arguing that there's some semblance of incompetence associated there, sabotage, you name it. But it can be a whole host of things, right? And again, that particular attack, while it's on a physical scale, right, in terms of the actual explosion itself, it's not off the ball to mention or even to speculate that it started with possibly malware that was induced in the system, right? So anything that works with some kind of program might not necessarily have to connect to the network or to connect to some kind of network, but anything that runs with a program, anything that is some kind of automation, anything that deals with some kind of software, some kind of system, some kind of hardware, if you look at it from a different point of view, naturally those particular systems can directly be jeopardized in terms of proper functionality. So these are some of the things that you also need to take into consideration. Yes, putting in things like surveillance and so on, but what we tend to forget that when you put in a camera, for instance, right, it doesn't stop the intruder. This is one of the things that is quite interesting when it comes to security. Yes, fair and fine, it gives you an idea of who might have done it or who might have intruded as far as your particular home is concerned, but it doesn't stop the actual attack itself, right? So if someone decides to break into your house right now, the fact that there's a camera does not stop them from picking up your television set and leaving with it. It doesn't stop them from hurting you. It doesn't stop them from doing what it is that they initially intended to do, right? So it's always important to understand that, yes, when it comes to obviously solving the crime and so on, those particular aspects do help in a court of law, but more often than not, they don't stop the crime itself. So it's imperative to get that understanding that, yes, while we still would say cameras or surveillance is important in that regard, they don't stop the crime at large, if you or per se, if you look at it from a different point of view. Obviously, when you look at financial institutions, what you're literally focusing on in this particular instance is your stock exchange platforms. If your stock exchange crashes, then the entire economy is literally jeopardized in that regard. So these particular platforms are also quite intricate or very relevant and imperative when it comes to any particular nation, and protection of them needs to be of the utmost importance or priority if you look at it from a different point of view in that regard. So it's not just that, but obviously the banking sector as well. needs to have mechanisms put in place to make sure that they try and safeguard against cyber attacks, or literally try and circumvent them as they happen, or identify them when they happen, to try and make sure that issues are resolved accordingly. And sometimes the best defense is just to go offline, regroup, and then you can always come back online after a certain time, normally a couple of hours. It all depends, but it's worth it as opposed to trying to deal with the issue as it's taking place, because like we've mentioned before, your attackers can actually see what type of defenses you're putting up, and it makes it a lot easier for them to try and obviously circumvent that those particular protection mechanisms you're putting in place. But when you go offline, you regroup, you try and do your patchwork accordingly, and then you go back online. Makes it a lot difficult for them to try and run that same attack again, and makes it a lot easier for you as well in terms of the whole concept of business continuity at large in that regard. Yes, it might be a bit of a hindrance and an inconvenience when it comes to your clientele at large, but ultimately it safeguards everyone at the end of the day, if you look at it from a different point of view. So we've already talked about the food distribution network and so on. Gave a typical example of that meat factory that was typically attacked a couple of months ago, as far as the particular infrastructure environment there is concerned. And remember, it's not just most people, individuals are thinking, okay, what would someone want with a meat factory really, in terms of jeopardizing that environment? Again, comes to disgruntled former employees or anyone with a vendetta, anyone with an axe to grind, if you look at it from a different point of view. But it's not just the product line that is affected, for instance, right? It's more the information associated with customers. Those credit card information we were talking about earlier on, this is what most of these attackers are looking for when it comes to these different institutions. So it doesn't have to be an actual banking institution. It's any particular business that has a database associated with their clientele, with their customers, that also has information associated with their banking details, their credit card numbers, their transactions, you name it, because that obviously is what all, if not most of these attackers are out for, as far as your basic environments they are concerned. So with the health in the situation as well, again, it goes back to setups, because if you look at one of the successful attacks as far as basic national health environments are concerned, would literally allow an attacker to obtain details of medical histories. Again, this is confidential information, right? So again, these particular environments need to be properly secure. Obviously, this could potentially be sold to interested parties. And who are the interested parties when it comes to medical histories? Your insurance companies, right? So if an insurance company has medical details for a specific individual, it's easy for them to sell them or try and sell them a life policy or disability a policy or disability cover, or your retirement covers and so on. It makes it a lot easy for them. Sometimes most of us get phone calls from an insurance company, or most of us get a phone call from a telecoms company selling a specific product. And you end up wondering, where is it that these guys got my phone number from? Because I don't remember signing up for any product. I don't even remember signing up for any call back as far as these particular services are concerned. But for some odd reason, I'm getting certain providers giving me a call in terms of either medical aid, or in terms of literally looking at some kind of internet service, or looking at life cover or life or policies, whichever way you look at it. That particular information is obviously sold to these particular organizations, obviously having gotten that information illegally, if you're looking at it from a distinctive point of view. So it's quite imperative for you to understand what the actual background is and what is the end game when it comes to these particular attacks as far as your setups there are concerned. So within that whole critical infrastructure, you've got, again, all the way up until your chemicals. It's, again, something that needs to be safeguarded accordingly, just to avoid any discrepancies at large. And then when you discuss your building targets, for argument's sake, you're looking at the whole concept of your HVAC systems, right? So normally with your building targets, you're discussing your HVAC systems. And remember HVAC. So if you look at your building targets here, more often than not, you're looking at your HVAC system. So remember, HVAC is short for heating, ventilation and air conditioning, right? So that's what HVAC stands for. So HVAC is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning there. So normally you find that access to these particular HVAC systems would literally permit an attacker to raise or lower internal temperatures to unacceptable levels, right? Obviously causing the staff to who work within these particular critical environments to cause distinctive problems in that regard. So obviously an entire data center could be taken out of service in this way, because remember, when you look at your data centers, you've got a multitude of computer systems that are working in there. There's a lot of heat, obviously, these particular machines or servers generate, and ultimately to keep them cool, you obviously have the appropriate air conditioning configurations put in place there, right? So if that particular air conditioner or those particular air conditioning systems are literally shut down, or if the temperature is raised to a level that could cause some kind of detriment, obviously the entire data center can distinctively malfunction, either by your computer systems or your servers or your storage units there getting damaged, or literally by the whole issue of the generic overheating there causing a fire in that in those environments. So this is the reason why it's quite imperative for you to ensure that these particular systems are literally unbreakable, just to make sure that your environments are as appropriately secure as distinctively necessary in that regard. So if you look at the type of buildings that you're looking at, right? So if you look at the type of actual buildings, right? What you're discussing is, if you're looking at types there, I think let's use another slide. You're looking at your factories. You're discussing warehouses, obviously. So warehouses. You're also looking at transport hubs. Right, as distinctive buildings that are relevant in that regard. You're also discussing operational buildings. So that's our fourth operational. And then you're looking at office buildings, typically. You can also discuss your hotels. You can also even mention your sports and recreation. And then you can discuss your retail outlets. So these are the different types of buildings that you're looking at as far as setups will go. Obviously, your factories, you've got your manufacturing plants as typical examples, and normally you find that most attackers would literally control an assembly line as a means of an attack. Your basic warehouses and distribution centers there, where obviously high value goods are distinctively stored. Your transport hubs, that one is also self-explanatory. So your airports, your rail configurations there. You can also even discuss the operational buildings we're talking about, for instance, like your call centers or telephone exchange platform or air traffic installations. That's a typical example of your operational buildings, your office buildings. The name is self-explanatory there. Same difference would go with hotels. Same difference would go with your sports and recreation systems. As well as your buildings at large. And literally what you're looking at in that instance is also having your HVAC systems jeopardized to make it literally unbearable as far as functionality within that space is concerned. And then lastly, you can also discuss the whole concept of your retail properties or your retail outlets like your shops, your shopping malls, and so on. You can also even discuss the private housing, right? Like we were mentioning earlier on, that that whole issue of having the monitors put in place, yes, doable, but remember, it doesn't stop the crime, and there are loops. There's mechanisms that are put in place that can cause an actual image or an actual clip or an actual video to loop. So when you're busy monitoring that and you're checking a specific section of your house or your property at large, you're thinking everything is fine there, but it's a natural loop that has been incorporated on your system as an actual attack or as an actual hack in that particular system. And then this leaves your attackers to obviously have enough time to do what they need to do when it comes to your environment there. So if they're stealing a car, if they're stealing property or appliances, you name it, it makes it very easy for them in that regard, because the cameras or that the monitoring system that you got there is not showing the true image of what is actually happening outside. So ironically, you find that some of these security systems are vulnerable. Like I was just mentioning earlier on, the CCTV environments there make use of a digital recorder, right, to record images as well as videos. That may obviously allow that particular attacker to gain access to the organization's data network through backdoors, like we were mentioning earlier on in that actual recorder. And obviously, these so-called smart TVs are equipped with a camera and a microphone as well that can present a means of an attacker to gain access. So you still can have someone gain access to your environment through your smart TV. They can monitor. They can have their own surveillance using those particular gadgets in that setup, because we've got this whole issue of the Internet of Things, and ultimately, while it's all big on paper, but there's also a drawback in terms of security at large as far as setups are concerned. Remember, with the Internet of Things, even your fridge right now connects to the internet. Your fridge can send you a message to tell you that you're out of milk or you're running out of a specific product, whichever way it is. So that is brilliant, right, in that regard. But again, we tend to forget that that also comes with its own set of vulnerabilities, because all those gadgets can be used to literally break into systems as far as your environments are concerned. So there's always some kind of double-edged sword scenario when it comes to these particular environments, as far as your particular digital existence I was talking about earlier on is concerned. So when it comes to trying to safeguard, obviously with manufacturing, as the name would say, you've got it's just a manufacturing platform that you've got there in these particular setups, and most of these systems were involved in planning and design, development, or actual manufacturing of distinctive products. And naturally, they've been targets of these cyber attack platforms for years on end now. And obviously, you'll find that some of these attacks are used to conduct that industrial espionage we were talking about earlier on, in terms of very delicate information when it comes to probably an upcoming product or an upcoming service or any internals associated with the organization, whether it's financial or the human resource component, the technical aspect. It all depends. And ultimately, you find that some of these attacks are literally also designed just to cause disruption in the industrial processes at large. So it's literally just repeating what we mentioned before, as far as the whole concept of the businesses at large there is concerned. So when you're looking at defending at these particular attacks, so we're talking about the basic steps as far as attacks they are concerned. It's also important to look at generic defenses. So ultimately, you can look at defenses against attacks. And what you're looking at more often than not there is, first of all, there's a process called layering. And obviously, as the name would say, is putting different security measures in place to make it more difficult for someone to actually break into your system as far as your setup there is concerned. So if you're looking at a system, putting it in the room right in the middle of the floor, for instance, that needs multiple access in terms of gaining access to that specific environment. So layering is just ensuring that you put mechanisms in place, both system as well as physical configurations in your particular setup there is concerned. So if you look at just a typical example, the Hope Diamond, right, which is a massive 45 carat stone, right? In terms of security, these particular diamonds, obviously, or these particular stones, per se, are not openly displayed in public with obviously a single security guard standing at the door, right? Instead, they are literally enclosed in protective cases. First of all, these particular cases are bulletproof. These particular cases are smash proof. They are literally resistant to almost any outside force, right? That's a typical example of what layering is all about, right? So the cases are literally then located in special rooms with massive walls, with sensors that literally detect the slight movement or the slightest of vibrations, right? And then you find that at the doors to the actual rooms are monitored around the clock by remote security cameras. You've got these particular video images from each particular camera that is literally recorded. Then the rooms themselves are in buildings surrounded by roaming guards as well as fences. So this is just a typical example of what layering is all about, just making it more difficult. It doesn't mean if anyone tries to really put their mind to it, they can't literally steal this particular diamond. But it makes it a lot difficult because by the time they get to the third layer, for instance, possibly the security forces, they are already at the premises. So this is the advantage of layering, that by the time, if you get 5 layers, just for argument's sake, by the time your particular attacker gets to the third layer, you've already identified that something is happening or an attack is taking place, and then obviously you've got a contingency plan as far as that particular setup there is concerned. So ultimately, one defense mechanism may be relatively easy for an attack to circumvent. So literally, instead, security systems must have multiple layers that literally make it very difficult for this particular, and they have to use a different set of skills in order for them to break in that specific setup that is there. So what it means is it's very unlikely for an attacker, no matter how many tools or how brilliant they are or how skilled they are, to literally break through all the layers of any particular type of defense. Right, so it's imperative for you to make sure that at least a layered approach can make it more difficult for someone to try and access your particular system as far as configurations would go. So a very basic example is your laptop having a password that you need to incorporate. After you incorporate your password, you need to then insert a PIN. After you insert a PIN, then you need to then work with the fingerprint scanner. After the fingerprint scanner, you've got a voice recognition platform that is there. And then lastly, a retina scanner that then enables you to gain access to the system. Those are all layers, right? So if someone tries to access your system by entering the incorrect password or by trying to literally use, for instance, the incorrect biometric configurations there, the system at large already would indicate or would identify or would send a signal to whoever to say, listen, someone is trying to break into the system, or you've entered this particular password more than the 3 times that is necessary, or you've tried to access using your biometric platforms more than the set time, or more than the set number of times at large. This could be an attack, and obviously whatever measures need to be put in place are incorporated in that regard. So that's what layering is all about in that regard. And then at the same time, you can also even talk about limiting, right? Obviously, when you're looking at limiting, it's looking at the level of access, right? So literally, what level of access should users have, right? And obviously, the best answer to this is literally the least amount necessary to do their jobs, and that's it. So if you look at the computer systems on campus, just for argument's sake, as a student, what level of access should you have, right? These are the kind of questions that the IT office or the guys that are looking at the IT infrastructure on campus that literally ask that, okay, look, as a distinctive student, what level of access should these particular students have, right? And again, like I said before, if anyone sitting in that same meeting would literally say the best answer is the least amount necessary. Why? Because that literally, to a certain extent, safeguards the system, right? So that you log in, you access the programs that you need to access, and that's it. You might need to print from from remote localities, same difference applies. Anything outside the confines of you using the programs associated with either your qualification or the programs associated with the specific module, for instance, or either the programs just associated with you being able to undertake your work accordingly on campus is concerned, it could jeopardize the actual network security at large, right? You could end up accessing certain content that you shouldn't, or you could end up accessing the admin computer systems. You could end up accessing registration computer systems if you're given the rights to do so. So it's important to note that when it comes to security, obviously your limiting is ultimately important in that regard. So limiting access to information literally reduces the threat against it. Right? So this is very important to remember that when you limit access to information, you obviously reduce the threat against that same information that you're looking at. So literally only those who must use the data should have access to it. Anything outside that can massively jeopardize your system as far as your particular environments they are concerned. So ways to limit access are technology-based. So literally assigning permissions, which obviously you will also look at in the CNAS section as well. Assigning permissions so that a user can only read but not modify a file. So this we've already looked at actually. When you look at it from your file and folder permissions when it comes to the NTFS file system, where you can determine and dictate whether a specific user or group of users can either read a file, read and write, modify, execute, you name it. So these are ways of limiting access that obviously try and safeguard safeguard against content in that regard. So you've got technology-based limitation, which is what we're just talking about now, and then procedural, which is literally prohibiting someone from removing sensitive document from the premises, right? So so that's copying content and then leaving with it as far as configurations they are concerned. One of the other things that you also want to discuss here is diversity. Diversity, right, there you go. So this is again, you could say closely linked to layering. Why? Because obviously, just as it is important to protect data with layers of security, it must also be, so too must the layers be different or diverse. So we can't, when you're layering, you can't use the same thing. If you're looking at so just for argument's sake, let's assume if you go back to that computer example that I was talking about in terms of logging in, if we say a certain individual has to log in, has to enter a password, a different password 5 times, we can't call that layering, because the whole concept is just entering a password, right? Whether it's a different password across the board, the issue is the means of accessing the system is entering a password. So if you've got a system put in place that looks at security, where someone has to enter a password, 5 different password rather 5 times, it's just literally the same thing, because it's about entering a password, right? But the moment you put in entering a password, then you put in biometrics, then you put in probably a RFID tag or your smart card, then you put in probably a physical, some other physical aspect of you gaining your access. That is a typical example of diversity, because all of those different forms of accessing a specific system literally look at a diverse or different way of configuration in that regard. So the reason why that is put in place is that if attackers penetrate one layer, they literally cannot use the same technique to break through other layers. You get it? So obviously what we're saying here is, if it's about a brute force attack, which is about guessing passwords until you get the right one, right? If we're saying the second layer is also about passwords, then they'll use this exactly the same method. So there's no challenge there, or there's no security, maybe, if you want to put it in that particular perspective. So it's important to take that into consideration as far as setups there are concerned. All right, and then the other one is obscurity. So obscurity, which remember, when something is obscure, it's not clear per se, if you want to look at it from a different point of view. So a basic example of obscurity would be to not reveal the type of computer system or operating system that you're using. Right? That makes it difficult for the attacker to know what type of system you've got, because if they know that, okay, look, you're using this particular type of operating system, you're using this particular type of hardware, you're using this particular type of firmware, for instance, it makes it easier for them to do their homework to try and break into that system. But if they don't know, then it makes it very difficult for them to try and break into a specific system. So a generic example of obscuring a system, or obscurity, like I was mentioning earlier on, is not revealing the type of computer, the type of OS, the type of software, and the type of network connection that a particular computer system is using. So if you look at it from a different point of view, obscuring what goes on inside a system or organization and avoiding clear patterns of behavior make attackers from outside more obviously the attacks from outside more difficult. So if you look at another probably closer to home example, normally you'll find that when it comes to hijacking, like your car hijacking, most of these, I think that the security forces or the police would normally tell you that, okay, look, if you're driving back home, for argument's sake, don't use the same route every time. Don't have a specific pattern, or literally don't come back home at the same time as well, because that prevents a pattern, right? So if someone wants to attack, they know that, okay, look, you normally pop in using that particular road in that direction, and by 4:30, you're normally parked by the gate trying to get access, or you're normally opening the gate and gaining access to your own property. So if you've got a pattern, it makes it easy for anyone to attack, right? Because they can actually do their homework to say, okay, look, from Monday to Friday, this is how you operate. So I can attack you at any particular time during the week there, because you've got the same pattern. So all I need to do is make sure that I'm in the vicinity at this particular time, or I make sure that before you get to your place at this particular junction, I try and attack, or as you get to the gate, I make sure that I block you and whatnot. So that's what obscurity is all about as far as your particular environments would go. And then lastly, believe it or not, being simple is ultimately the most one of the most secure things that you can do, right? So literally, you find that obviously, because most of these attacks are coming from a variety of sources, and in many ways, information security is, by its very nature, quite complex, right? So if you want to look at it from a different point of view, simplicity is the best complexity if you want to look at it from a different angle. So obviously, the more complex something becomes, the more difficult it is to understand. This is what we tend to forget, that we can be hoodwinked by our own security system. So if we make things a lot secure, or a lot complex rather, it might be even difficult for us to actually use those systems when the time arises. Or it might be difficult for us to actually call for help if need be when the time arises. So you need to ensure that if you look at a security guard who does not understand how monitor detectors interact with an infrared lighting, for instance, then it makes it difficult, right, for them to secure those particular environments. So obviously, in addition, complex systems literally allow many opportunities for something to go wrong, right? So complex systems literally allow many opportunities for something to literally go wrong. And in short, complex systems can be a thief's ally. The more complex it is, someone can actually work with it in that regard. So complex security systems can be hard to understand, hard to troubleshoot, and hard to feel secure about. So as much as possible, it's important to have some kind of simplicity thrown in there, because when you look at security or complex security schemes, these are often compromised to make literally them a lot easier for trusted users to work with, right? So yet they can also make it easier for attackers as far as setups they are concerned. So in short, keeping a system simple from the inside but complex on the outside can sometimes be the best thing to have. So making a system simple on the inside but complex on the outside. So whoever is looking at it from the outside is looking at a very complex system, for argument's sake. But for those that it's protecting, or for those that are within, quite simple as far as basic operation there is concerned. It literally can be the most difficult thing to do, but the benefits are quite large in that regard. All right, so that's the whole issue about identifying the different targets that are there as far as your particular setups would go. We'll also need to look at the vulnerabilities again, and probably just delve into the whole concept of securing your environments a lot better by understanding who these particular attackers are, in which particular categories they fall under, and ultimately how you can try and make sure that your systems are ultimately more secure from these particular attackers as far as your particular setups would go. So the next thing we want to look at is vulnerabilities, impacts. We also want to discuss the whole concept of the different attackers that are there as far as your systems at large there are concerned. All right. So do we have any questions, contributions, or concerns from anyone? Questions, contributions, concerns. Let's see. Use your chat section there. While I quickly unmute you here. So unmuted. Does anyone want to add something there, or ask a question, or state a concern, whichever way? So feel free to to unmute your mic and state your case. You can also use the chat section there.
Excuse me, sir?
Yes, Saman, what's happening?
So what you said about making your security system complex as an appearance, so that complexity, would it simply be a bluff, or would it provide an actual use? Would it be usable in an actual situation?
No, it can be both. right? So you can literally have a setup like you mentioned that the complexity looks complex from the outside, which is literally a bluff as far as configurations would go, and then you can also have the same complexity incorporated there. So it could be complex for someone who's looking at it from the outside, but you understand your system in its entirety. And it becomes obviously that's quite simple for you from the inside, right? So it's complex to anyone who's outside, who doesn't understand the system, or who's literally trying to attack the system, if you look at it from a different point of view. But that same complex system, you've understood it to its to the core from the inside. So that makes it simple to your particular setup. So it can literally be both in that regard. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does, sir. Thank you.
Okay, cool. And then something has come through on chat, yeah? Yes, you've got you've got what they call intrusion detection systems, and then obviously intrusion prevention systems. So literally, these would obviously try and, if you're looking at it from a network point of view, it can be able to detect abnormal traffic at a specific port, for instance, or at a specific time of day, as far as configurations they are concerned. So you've got a multitude of systems that are there that can detect attacks as they happen, or that can prevent attacks as far as configuration. I'll give you a typical example of some of these setups. Assuming when you look at your credit card profile and your online banking profile, assuming that you normally do your online purchases maybe at a certain time of the month, so probably let's say mid-month for argument's sake, that's when you normally buy gadgets or products or whatever it is, or services online using your credit card. You also do it at a specific time of the day, right? You've literally created what they call a digital signature, or a footprint rather, when it comes to usage of, or when it comes to your banking profile. If anything if anything happens, or if anything in terms of your account happens outside the normal setup, so assuming that you normally buy online between 2 p.m. to latest 6 p.m., and normally, like I said before, mid-month and so on, if anything goes off your bank or your account at 3 o'clock in the morning, that is automatically supposed to be a flag, right? Because it literally, it's outside your digital footprint. You don't normally do that at all. So when you find any transactions that are taking place at 3 a.m. in the morning or 2 a.m. in the morning, towards the end of the month, or at the beginning of the month, already that is outside your initial signature, right? So systems should be able to identify that and send a flag to say, okay, look, something might be happening as far as this particular account there is concerned. Either we're going to block the account, or block the card rather, or we're going to freeze the account, or we need to make sure that we contact the particular individual, whichever way you look at it. But normally you find that those cards are blocked until you verify that, okay, yes, it was me who was making a purchase at that particular time of the day. Will they then unblock your card in that regard? All right. Does that make any sense for you there, Bontley?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions there, contributions or concerns from anyone? Any other questions, contributions, or concerns?
Evening, sir. I wanted to ask that is yesterday's lecture being uploaded on YouTube?
Which yesterday's lecture now? Cybersecurity. I think we only had it this week, which is today.
Oh no, sorry. Sorry, sir.
Okay. All right then. Any other questions there? Any other questions or contributions or concerns? Alrighty, so I think we are sorted. So go through that content again. So again, this should be chapter 4 as far as your prescribed textbook is concerned. But remember, that's not the only material that chapter 3 rather, your cyber targets. That's not the only material that is relevant there. Look at your student manual as well for additional reading, for you to understand the concepts a little bit more. and excuse me, be able to apply them accordingly within your own professional and personal spaces. As far as ICT at large there is concerned. So no questions, no contributions, no concerns. I think we can call it a day. Stay safe, keep smiling. We'll see you in the next session. I think it should be sometime next week. I think we have a couple of face-to-face sessions next week as well. All right, then. Enjoy the weekend. Cheers.